According to the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator, the death toll in Türkiye and Syria from last week's catastrophic quake may surpass 56,000. So against that backdrop, have relief operations in the region picked up pace? How is corporate Korea seeking to ease the plight of the survivors? Meanwhile, what is the link between lax building regulations and the scale of the disaster in Türkiye? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week yet again during which we cover stories that made headlines elsewhere, stories here that made headlines elsewhere, that is. But today, we focus a significant portion of our panel talk on Korea joining the global relief operation Türkiye amid last Monday's devastating earthquake that also hit Syria. For more, I have Jack Barton here in the studio. Jack, it's good to have you back.
Wonderful to be back.
I also have Andres Sanchez Braun with us. Andres, it's good to see you as well.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Jack, Korea dispatched its own relief personnel to Turkey last Tuesday, and the media here has placed quite a bit of emphasis on the size of that contingent, which is said to be the largest sent to an overseas disaster zone at any one time, that is. What do you suppose the significance of this reality?
I think there's a number of reasons this is the case, and it's not just the Korean media. I was asked to report on this by overseas media as well, because it was such a big detachment. I think firstly it is just the scale of this disaster and the need, any sort of developed country around the world feeling that it should do something and send some kind of assistance. But playing into that, of course, is President Yoon Suk-yeol's commitment to really put South Korea on the international stage as well, make it a global partner, sort of now that it is a major economy, to act like other major economies around the world and be a much bigger player, whether it be in NATO or in humanitarian assistance. And that's why perhaps we're seeing the biggest ever contingent going out. And also in the way they have talked with Turkey about the need, you know, what do you need, rather than just, as is often the case, sending off a token contingent. What do you need? And they said, we need search and rescue, people to go from building to building. And so that's what they sent. I think as of today, they've found about 8 people. So they've been very successful so far. And finally, of course, Turkey's role in the Korean War. I mean, they sent about 35,000 troops here as part of the UN force. You referenced this in the bond of blood, you know, between South Korea and Turkey, and Turkey was here for South Korea in its time of need, and so this is South Korea reciprocating and saying, in your time of need, you know, we are going to help out.
Right, indeed. Andres, I believe conglomerates here in the country have also pledged humanitarian assistance to Türkiye. Could you fill us in a bit on these pledges?
Indeed. I actually have some figures here. Samsung Electronics has pledged $3 million. The SK Group has provided $1 million. Hyundai Motor Group will donate another $2 million. LG Group another $1 million. Lotte Group will provide $600,000, and so on and so on. Now, this money is mostly for Turkey, as you pointed out, although, for example, Hyundai Motor Group is being able apparently to send around $200,000 to the affected regions of Syria as well. All this aid is being sent either in the form of funds directly through Korea's community chest, which is the country's largest welfare institution, or either through the Red Cross or channeled through local Turkish NPOs. There's also in-kind aid in this case. For example, Samsung Electronics is sending, I understand, portable ultrasound diagnostic equipment, for example, or home appliances for all these people that are going to have to be put into temporary housing, or educational tablets for children. Now, aside from the bond of blood that Jack was mentioning, Turkey taking part in the Korean War and siding with the South, that is, we also need to understand that Turkey is a big country. It has 84 million people. That's more than Germany already. It's a big market, and Turkey buys around, I'd say, $7 billion of Korean goods every year, mostly electronic devices, motor vehicles, motor parts. Both countries have an FTA that came into force 10 years ago. And all of these conglomerates have local subsidiaries that are performing pretty well in this country. So, of course, they feel the need to support this country that has been very welcoming for them at a horrible time right now.
Right, indeed. Now, for more on the situation in the Middle East, let's take a moment to connect live to a journalist based in Syria for more on the plight of the people there amid the deadly earthquake. I have Stephen Sahihuni joining our talk from Syria, as I mentioned earlier. Stephen, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you. And it's good to be on your show.
Right, Stephen, let's begin with a few words then on the search and rescue operations currently underway there in Syria as well as in neighboring Türkiye.
First of all, in Syria, we are going through a lack and a shortage of medical, and the hospitals are on a low, have a big shortage on medical equipment, medicine, and even doctors. As everyone knows, we've been living through 12 years of war. We've been living through 12 years of sanctions. So the hospitals are not functioning 100% like how we used to do before 2000 and before the war on Syria. That's why Syrian government in Damascus asked and requested for aid and rescue teams immediately. The UAE sent Algeria, Iraq, Russia, about 21 countries around the world. Yesterday, Cyprus and Italy supported the rescue teams in my city here in Latakia and in the city of Aleppo and Hama in the central of Syria have been working non-stop, day in and day out, all day for 24 hours, non-stop. There have been successfully getting people out. Some of them are children. The problem is the temperature, and when the earthquake happened, it was a huge storm happening. The temperatures are really low, and it did not help the rescue teams. Everyone's sending aid. As I said, 21 countries, they sent aid planes full of food, medicine, rescue teams. According to the United Nations, 5.5 million Syrians today are homeless in Syria because of this earthquake. And this is the big problem. Okay, we have the aid in Syria. We got the food today, tomorrow. But the problem is Syria cannot rebuild. As I said, we're 12 years of war and sanctions. The number one request of all Syrian people is to lift the sanctions so we can import the building goods, so we can make new houses for these 5.5 million people. We are talking about a humanitarian issue. Lifting the sanctions off 180 days, as the American the State Department and the White House announced, in 6 months, you're not going to make houses for 5.5 million people. Those people cannot. Will Americans accept living in tents and basketball teams in the winter where the temperature is under zero? No. This is the main request. Is today everyone, the whole world and the whole world community have to put their political differences on the side. We are talking about the human beings. We are talking about children. We are talking about babies, women, old people. They cannot sit in tents in the parks. Okay, that's good. Everyone's helping Turkey. God bless the soul of every person in Turkey who lost their lives. And I hope the people who are wounded get over it and get stronger and they have their house. But Turkey is a strong economy, as your guest said. Turkey is 84 million people. Turkey has no sanctions. Turkey has no war. Syria, who really needs help from the world community, not only from Russia and UAE and Algeria and Iraq, Libya. Libya is helping Syria, and they are in a war. But because the humanitarian, there is neighborhoods are wiped out. There are families are wiped out. This is what I'm trying to say. The number in my city alone, there is thousands. There is over 5,000, 6,000, between 5,500 to 6,000 people dead. There is 1,000 Syrians in Turkey who died. Like we're talking about a death toll of 7,500 to 8,500 people who are dead. Tens of thousands are injured. We're talking about huge numbers here. There is over 5,000 buildings in the city of Aleppo by itself. They are unlivable. They have to be put down. 5,000 building. Aleppo is about 5 million people. 5,000 building. We are talking about a massive number of families who are lost their houses.
Right.
In my city.
Right.
In my city.
Stephen, I was wondering, you talked about how the sanctions are keeping Syria from, hindering, that is, relief efforts there in Syria. And I was wondering, the U.S. has spoken about lifting earthquake sanctions, that is, for exempting earthquake aid from Syrian sanctions. Do you see this as perhaps aiding the efforts there?
Unfortunately, no. Look, I am a Syrian American, and I'm born in California, where earthquake happens. 180 days is not going to do anything. And lifting sanctions off of only the aid, till now, we cannot import, as I said, heavy equipment. We cannot import stuff equipment for rebuilding in Syria. What the United States have to do, and the world community, not only the United States, the United Nations have to have a role. Let's finish this political difference. The United States, they can do it. They can let them for once in their lifetime to have a role in ending the suffering of people, and that's what they should do. The U.S. Congress has to pressure the White House to lift the sanctions. Let's finish this. We are talking about a human being's life. Whoever comes, whoever goes, that doesn't matter. What matters is the people of this country. As I said, 5.5 million for a country who are homeless, for a country like Syria, who's 25 million people. That's a huge, massive number. And especially, as I said, we already have half of the country destroyed because of the war. Right. And this, we have been suffering from before the earthquake. We were living on 10 minutes of electricity. Why do we have 10 minutes of electricity? Because the Americans are illegally in the east of Syria taking the oil wells. What are the Americans doing from Washington, D.C. all the way to the east of Syria, taking the oil wells? Me in Latakia, I have 10 minutes of electricity.
Right, Stephen, politics all aside, though, the pain of the people in Syria, I'm sure it's something that the world can relate to. And right, that being said, Stephen, could I perhaps direct your attention a bit to neighboring Türkiye? There is talk about how the tragedy in Türkiye, especially the destruction of the buildings, were perhaps came, that is, because the government failed to heed alarm bells raised by Turkish experts back in the year 2021 with regard to the safety of their buildings. Could you tell us a bit about that as well?
Of course, Turkey, who has a history of earthquake, I'm sure in the Turkish law, they have like Syria has a law, but we couldn't do it it's the same thing on the safety of buildings. So they might be as I say, corruption in Turkey. In the infrastructure, the businessmen who are building these buildings, they're not going by the law. They're not going by what the percentage, what the Turkish government gave them. That's why on this earthquake, massive numbers of lives were lost. Cities were wiped out in Turkey. So there is someone broke the law. Either it was the government officials, they were being corrupt, or it's the government officials and the business and the real estate corporations who are building all these buildings and buildings of these towers. They were not putting the right amount of, as we know, metal, iron, and other that goes into the building. On the other side, where I live, Syria does have a law for buildings, but as I said, because of we were going through 12 years of war, we couldn't go by those rules on laws one by one, like everything. There was a lot of laws. As you can see, what happened today in Syria in this earthquake, old buildings stayed strong, but the new buildings fell because we don't have the good equipment that we used to have 10 years ago.
Right. Stephen, with regard to Turkey, do you see the tragedy that is perhaps affecting the parliamentary and presidential elections this May?
Erdogan might use this for his own advantage and postpone the Turkish election, because he has the law, he has the right to, in the Turkish law, to postpone, and he can announce the emergency law and say that we are not ready to make an election. So he has, and I see him doing this and using this to his own personal advantage.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much for making the time to join us live with your thoughts, and our prayers go out to the 5.8 million people who remain homeless there in Syria. Thank you for being with us. Right, Andres, back here in the studio, over 74 countries have sent relief personnel to Türkiye, and not as many have been able to do so to Syria because of the sanctions that Stephen mentioned. But all that aside, do you see this unfortunate calamity in the Middle East as perhaps providing the world with a fresh sense of momentum, if I may, to put on stage a tangible new peace momentum, peace effort, that is?
Well, it's I think it's a very complex issue, definitely, and I think, as Stephen already pointed out, exempting sanctions for 180 days is probably not going to make it. I think this is a perfect moment to underline how sanctions many times have these horrible side effects and on population. Well, most of them actually in the end affect a population. So I think the UN and many countries should think about future sanctions in this sense. But that said, I'd also like to talk about the other side of Syria, regarding what Steve was mentioning, the Bashar al-Assad side. This, for example, Idlib province, where the earthquake hit, is basically the last area controlled by all these militia groups, most of them proxies of Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, and supported partially by the Turkish authorities. Now, there's been some sort of status quo since 2020 in this region, based on a ceasefire that was agreed by Turkey and Russia, and that once again is a perfect example of how the Syrian civil war suddenly turned into a proxy war. But I think the earthquake in this case underlines once again what horrible conditions these people were already living in, because Turkey shut down the border to Syria, and there's basically one area where you can go through, the Bab al-Hawa crossing, that is. And the UN is already pointing out what a disaster this is, because the roads connecting to Bab al-Hawa are damaged by the earthquakes on both sides. There's no way to get aid through the Bashar al-Assad side, and obviously these militia groups are rejecting anything that has to do with the regime, even when it comes to aid. And the only aid that you can get through is through this this part, and it's rendered unusable almost. So silver lining, maybe. Turkey has showed willingness to maybe open more crossings through the border. And in that sense, will this help any peace efforts there? Maybe, who knows, maybe this will help solidify at least this ceasefire that we were talking about, and which is breached constantly. I think the last time was in January. So maybe in that particular area we might see some progress, who knows?
Right, hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Moving forward, Jack, let's now turn to career-related stories that made international headlines of the past week. An opinion piece on Newsweek touched upon the debate for South Korea's possible possession of its own nuclear weapons. What appears to be the overall view among pundits regarding this potential reality?
I think there's momentum for South Korea getting its own nukes. Of course, it goes back decades. It did try to do it half a century ago, and the US stepped in and said no. But under the Trump administration, a lot of US allies in the world suddenly felt like, if we're in the corner, does the US really have our back? And, it could change whoever the administration is. One administration might be, yeah, but we don't know what's in the future. And with the disastrous sort of withdrawal from Afghanistan, and it's got everybody wondering. Now here in South Korea, among the general populace, there is widespread support for South Korea having its own nukes. I think the last poll I saw was 76.6% of the population backing not the deployment of outside nuclear weapons, but building, South Korea creating its own nuclear weapons. So when President Yoon Suk-yeol recently said it, and I was actually surprised he actually came out and said it, that if the DPRK, North Korea, keeps pushing forward with its weapons program, we will either consider asking for the deployment of nuclear weapons here, or we will create our own nuclear weapons, and it set off this whole buzz. Now, initially I thought he was really just politically signaling, sending a message to the Americans saying, okay, what are the details? You've never really told us what the defense umbrella is or what this means. We want details. We want a part in the planning as well. We want tabletop exercises. We want to do drills. If we're attacked, a nuclear response on North Korea. And we want to drill that out through military exercises. That's all happening. They got those concessions. I also got a sense that he was signaling to China, it's time to stop blocking any maneuvering through the UN Security Council. You've got to get on board efforts to try and curb the nuclear program. China doesn't want South Korea to have nuclear weapons. On top of that, it would mean Japan would almost certainly get nuclear weapons at all. It couldn't conceive of Seoul having them without Tokyo having them. But when I spoke to many analysts, actually, and people close to the government, and they told me, no, he's serious. And I said, is this if there's a seventh nuclear test? And others said, if he just keeps testing missiles, particularly the maneuverable, low-flying missiles capable of delivering tactical nuclear weapons, he's serious. But of course, the big question, you'd have to test them. Where are you going to test them? You can't test them at sea anymore. And look at the trouble they had deploying THAAD on a golf course and the protests. 76.6% of people may support it, but I guarantee you, if you tell people we're going to drill a hole in the middle of Hala Mountain and test a nuclear bomb in there, 100% of the people will be. So, problematic, but again, as a political weapon, it's very powerful, and it's had huge effect. The fallout, excuse the pun, has been felt everywhere already.
Right. Staying with inter-Korean matters, Andres, there was also some coverage regarding South Korea's response to North Korea's crypto theft, right? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. This week, the South Korean government approved its first ever unilateral sanctions against individuals and institutions or groups linked to North Korea's cyber crime hacking activities. Now, these sanctions target 4 individuals and 7 groups. Who are they? Well, there's this person called Park Jin-hyuk, who is actually linked to, you might recall the 2014 Sony Pictures hacking incident when they released that movie called The Interview. This person is also linked to the WannaCry ransomware incidents that have been taking place since 2017. There's also included in this sanction package, there's also the infamous Lazarus group. You might have heard of them. According to a UN report that will soon be released, they are behind 2022's largest cyber theft. That was around $600 million stolen from users of this video game called, Axie Infinity. Now, what is the significance of this? What do these sanctions intend? Well, the Korean government actually, the foreign ministry the other day, in a statement said, well, this actually is intended to raise awareness. We're telling other countries when it comes to cybersecurity in North Korea, please be extra careful. Right. Because we're seeing not only the regime is able to circumvent conventional sanctions put in place by the UN and other countries, they are increasingly getting better and better at cyber crime, and they're raking all this money for their weapons of mass destruction.
Right, and that South Korea needs to take action now. All right, as always, Andres, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Jack, it was great to have you here. Thank you for your insights.
A pleasure.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye. Do join us again same time tomorrow. That is Tuesday. Thank you for now.